Because you have to remember what is an actual home loan? What is a loan? Well, a loan is actually a loan against your cash flow and income. It's not a loan against the asset. The asset secures it, which is why a complete stranger like a bank is willing to give you $500 million.
The mindset is about saving. The mindset's not about making money. And that's that same mindset where it's like the accountant's there and the accountant's giving you that advice that says, hey, you're gonna save 3 to 5K in tax. That's once again the saving mindset, and the saving mindset is a loser's mindset in my opinion.
The best time to purchase property isn't trying to time the market. The best time to purchase investment properties is when you are financially capable to do so.
I'm very excited as today we have the #1 ranked single mortgage broker business in Mortgage Choice for the nation, a multi-business owner and now co-developer with over $200 million in upcoming projects in the pipeline, Dan Liao. Welcome, Dan. So today we're going to get into unlimited portfolio scaling. Now, over the last few years, it's gained a lot more popularity, and that is the utilization of trusts to protect or preserve borrowing capacity. A lot of investors are jumping on the bandwagon, and if done correctly, you can protect your borrowing capacity so it doesn't max out your personal borrowing power, essentially, right? Today, I want to get into it. I want you to explain how you're helping clients at home, property investors preserve their borrowing power through trusts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a really important point to start off with, right, before we go into that is you need to understand, I guess, the basic principles of lending, okay? Now, the only two things that you actually need to be so let's call it three things, right? Assuming you have a clean credit report, yeah? There's only really two things that you need to be approved for a home loan. Now, #1 is deposit, sufficient deposit or equity, yeah? #2 is borrowing capacity. Borrowing capacity is the one thing that stops people from scaling and buying more investment properties, right? And the reason behind that is because most people don't get the advice into what type of structures to actually utilize to be able to continue scaling and buying investment properties, right? You'll notice that most people that you speak to will have one owner-occupied home loan, right? Owner-occupied property, and then one more investment. They'll go back to the bank or they'll go to their broker and they'll say, I want to buy a third property. The broker will then say, or the banker will then say, unfortunately, you don't have enough borrowing capacity, so you won't be able to purchase. Or you have $300,000 in borrowing capacity, which essentially means that you can't buy anything, yeah? So within my team, I have an accountant, right? And what we do is we actually speak to clients about, what is your actual goal? Is it to purchase multiple 10, 20 investment properties? If it is, you have to actually implement a specific structure. And that structure comes in using non-personal entities for asset holding purposes, right? So like you said, it may be a trust with a corporate trustee, or it may be just a company. So this specifically is, tax related. So I'd say my accountant will most likely cover off on that. But to put it simply on the lending terms, right, what we're essentially doing is we're taking out an investment property loan in a non-personal entity, trust or company, and that trust and company, because it is not directly linked to your individual name, you can then apply a system that I call cloaking, where where when you purchase in the actual trust or the company, when you go and purchase your next property, that asset and the loan that was previously purchased in the non-personal entity is cloaked. It's invisible. Call it Harry Potter, invisibility cloak, right?
Yeah.
So that is a key factor that allows the everyday Australian to potentially be able to get from 3 to 5 or longer term, 10, right? Because you won't be able to do it in your own personal name. You have way too much leverage against you.
So that's what's separating the many Australians who are invested and have that, perhaps it's a principal place of residence or perhaps it's 2 investment properties or whatever it may be under their personal name. That's what separates them and those that are at 6 or 7 or 10.
100%, yeah.
Right? So for those at home watching now, explain how we can essentially cloak and make that particular entity, whichever we choose through our, obviously our through our taxation accountant's advice. How do we hide that essentially? How do you cloak that? How does that work?
So
from a lending perspective?
Yeah. So you don't. So a lot of people when we do go through this strategy, they go, "Is this legal? Like, is this okay?" Yeah, it's just how it is treated, right? So the way the banks actually view non-personal entities, right? So trust companies, so on and so forth, is that if you do not need to utilize the income in which it is generated, right? Generating, then you don't need to actually mention the actual entity itself. You just have to ensure that it washes its own face.
So
right?
essentially, you're saying that as long as it's self-sufficient,
correct.
You can get an accountant's letter to state that, and that doesn't need to be utilised or put into the serviceability calculator.
Correct.
So effectively, that's another property in another trust or another entity that doesn't get calculated in your personal serviceability.
Correct.
How good is that?
So let's break it down in really simple terms, right? So without getting too in depth, because it then borders on financial advice and tax advice, which.
But we're not giving financial taxation advice. We're just talking.
We're talking lending, right?
Like in Seinfeld, we're just talking.
Yeah. So the way you want to think of it is, if right now you go to the bank, right? You've got your first owner-occupied property, and you want to purchase your first investment. For the sake of this conversation, let's just say you have $1 million in borrowing capacity and you have a $500,000 mortgage on your owner-occupied, and then you take out another $500,000 to acquire your investment property. You've used up all of your borrowing capacity, right? Yep. If you were to purchase in your individual name, you're now stuck. You will not be able to purchase another property unless your income significantly increases, or you significantly decrease the total debt held in your individual name. So what you would do instead is you would then purchase your investment property under a non-personal entity, right? So it's not directly linked onto your name, which then means as long as it washes its own face, you will then be able to reset your capacity where you will have another $500,000 available to be able to purchase. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because essentially what you have here is a $500,000 owner-occupied home loan, $500,000 in investment debt, right? Because you have purchased in a non-personal entity with this, it is then cloaked and invisible, right? If you want to think of it that way. And then what you would do is you'd create a new non-personal entity to purchase your third property, because then you would have sufficient borrowing capacity. Again, it essentially resets itself, right? And all you need to focus on, and the only thing that you need is to ensure, number one, you scale responsibly, right? So you have to be financially capable. Number two, you need to ensure that you have a 20% deposit plus costs, which you would use from equity, right? And then you essentially just copy and paste, So you have to ensure that you do purchase in the right areas and you do purchase, correctly, because the whole point of it is that you also don't want to just purchase purely for capital growth. I get it. Capital growth is the wealth creator.
It is.
100%. It is the wealth creator. I agree.
It's why we do this.
Yeah, I agree, right? But you also have to understand there has to be a strategic balance to this, right? Because buying for capital growth purposes only means that your lifestyle income must go into covering the debt, right? But if you balance it a little bit and you focus a little bit on rental yield and on capital growth, right? Cash flow, it means that the debt can be covered by the actual
and not
investment.
sacrificing too much of that week-to-week lifestyle. That you enjoy.
Correct, yeah.
The avocado or the coffee, right? That they're all
the
saying.
avocado, coffee, Wagyu and wine.
Wagyu and wine, there you go.
Yeah.
So, Yeah.
So that's a really simple way of actually putting it, right? Like when I actually speak to clients, we go really in depth in relation to how many properties they can purchase, how much equity they have, and then we essentially reverse engineer it, right? But a key component here is most people take out too much debt in their own name, yeah? Because you have to remember that what is an actual home loan? What is a loan? Well, a loan is actually a loan against your cash flow and income. It's not a loan against the asset. The asset secures it, which is why a complete stranger like a bank is willing to give you $500 $1 million, right? Because they know that they can recoup their funds if you don't pay for the loan. But a loan is actually a loan against your income. An investment loan is a loan against your income and your tenants, right? So securing a investment property, which is actually strategically balanced with capital growth, will allow you to continuously scale using non-personal entities such as trusts or companies.
Exactly. The goal is the capital growth. Capital growth makes us rich, but we need the cash flow along the way to not sacrifice the week-to-week lifestyle and not get weighed down with too much negative to start, because that's obviously going to, not be beneficial. So
that's as simple as you can.
It's very simple.
It
That's
is.
what I mean.
That's the whole thing. It's like people think it's very complicated. So everyone, when they think about this, is they think it's extremely complicated. It is complex in nature. That's why you have to have the right guidance. But the actual structuring and the understanding of it, as long as you can find a broker that truly understands how to do this, how to actually calculate the numbers and balance it, you really have this pretty much an unlimited potential.
A perpetual machine, essentially.
100%.
Yeah, if you know how to utilize it correctly.
Yeah. This structure is it's the way that it's designed it's when it comes to lending policy is quite simple, right? So that's why I sit here, man, and I go, man, why don't more brokers actually understand this? Or why is it not more abundant information about it? I really don't know, right? And one of my goals is to actually share this with as many people as possible.
That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing today. So for someone at home watching this podcast right now, they're on an average wage. That both couples might be working. They've got a principal place of residence, or they may have an investment property or two. In order for them to now go, hey, you know what, we'd love to be one of those people. And I think it's somewhere, I think if you've got 5 properties, you're in the top 1% of property investors, right? Something like that, 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And for them to go from that, 1 or 2 properties to being that 5 or 6, or pay off their home sooner, or, retire on the 200,000 passive income. And that can be done through a lot of these structures and through the utilization of these strategies. What would you suggest would be their next steps?
Sure. So this is a really common scenario that I actually come across, right? And the main factor, firstly, number one, to ensure that it's achievable, we have to ensure that the actual client's income is not leveraged too high, right? So what do I mean by that? It means that we need to ensure that we don't have too many loans against their individual name already. The key component here is you need to ensure, if you have one property at the moment with sufficient equity, your next purchase is extremely important, right? Because the scenario that we used before, the $1 million in total borrowing capacity, if that client had purchased their investment property, their first investment property under their own name, and they have high expenses and so on and so forth, 2 kids, this, that, whatever, then they would find themselves in a really tough position because they will not have any more borrowing capacity. So the key thing here is your next move into how you leverage your debt is extremely important, right? So I would say for a scenario like that, if you have one owner-occupied home and you want to start scaling investment properties, I would say you need to incorporate a non-personal entity as soon as possible.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that is to protect or preserve your borrowing capacity.
It is to preserve the borrowing capacity. Yeah. Because if you max out your borrowing capacity, you're essentially sitting in a position where you can't do anything
if you max out your borrowing capacity, even if you set up the non-personal entity, you still can't borrow.
You can't.
So you've got to set up that non-personal entity before you max out your personal serviceability.
Correct. So it's a funny thing, right? Like I have clients that have their own accountants. And the first thing they say is like, oh, if you purchase in this non-personal entity, you won't get tax deductions, you won't get this, you won't get that. For sure, yeah, you're right. You actually lose the ability of negative gearing when you do that, right? But the key thing here is you want to like figure out what your negative gearing is going to provide to you when you do this, right? You might get a tax break of 3K, 5K per year. The question you would ask yourself is, would the property that I purchase increase in value more than 5,000, 10,000,
Yes.
50,000,
Yep.
right? Will it increase more than that? Say you get a tax deduction of 50K. Would your property increase more than 50K?
Yeah.
I don't know. You tell me, you're a property expert.
Mate, I absolutely love, because the second you said it, I knew exactly where you were going. I am looking to scale a portfolio by $500,000 property, another 500, another 500, 500, 500, and so on, right? Because I want the total portfolio value rising by 10% each year. I want to make capital gains. I want to make capital growth. It's the capital growth that makes me rich. I don't care for the $3,000 to $5,000 in tax return from the ATO. God bless the ATO for taking our money. They've got a great business going on, and that's not my focus. Is to take that money,
Absolutely.
pay them their money, but in turn scale that great portfolio to put yourself in and ultimately a way better position. I think this comes down to the saver mindset that we were talking about earlier.
Sure.
A lot of people are all looking to save money. They're looking to save as much as they can. Same goes for the payment of the principal place of residence. It's like, okay, I've got a 30-year loan. If I do overtime, okay, and if I cut my spending and I cut a holiday, okay, I can pay my home in 19 years or whatever, right? The mindset is about saving. The mindset's not about making money. And that's that same mindset where it's like the accountant's there and the accountant's giving you that advice that says, hey, you're going to save 3 to 5K in tax. That's once again the saving mindset, and the saving mindset is a loser's mindset, in my opinion.
Yeah. Look, I think the main thing you've highlighted there is like making money is a lot easier than saving money, right? And I always
can't save. I'm a bad saver. Like, there's a lot of Australians out there right now that aren't great savers. There's a lot of them as well.
Yeah, but people are great at paying minimum commitments on a loan, right? Yeah, for sure. I agree. But like a really great example is to highlight here is making money is definitely a lot easier than saving money, right?
Yeah.
All you have to do is buy one asset that grows with supply and demand and inflation, right? And you will make more money than you will save in that year. Yeah. So like instead of trying to save on tax, by the way, not financial advice, right? Instead of trying to just save on tax, right? Save cents, make dollars, right? 100%. Focus on the top, focus on bringing in more, right? It's the whole, like I always think of it this way is, if you want to go on holiday, right, and you're currently working full-time, your missus is working full-time, and you want to go on holiday, most people work their normal jobs, right, and then they spend less to put more aside, right? And while you spend less, you reduce your lifestyle, which can be a little bit uncomfortable, right? And it's required. Sometimes you got to do that, yeah? I'm not saying it's not a good thing to do. I'm saying there's a time and place for it. But it'd probably be easier for you to save up more money and put more money to the side if you were to just increase output, right? So make more, right? Because you could probably make $1,000 quicker than you could save $1,000, right?
Yep.
That's a basic example, yeah? But then when you look at it on a property sense, right? Properties have increased dramatically over the last 5 years or so, right?
Yeah.
Just buy an asset.
Yeah.
Just buy the asset and watch your wealth completely evolve, right? And if you just play it out over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years.
The middle class that are saving their money right now are about to lose out huge. Yeah. And the people that have assets are going to make a lot of money, and the government's essentially creating a rich and poor. Sure. They're removing the middle class. So you've got to make every Australian has a decision right now to make, and that is whether they're going to what side they're going to be on, because there's a huge wealth transition coming, and you're going to be on one side, and you've got to select that side And that's how it's going to be.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The other thing to also point out, right, like most people don't make the move to actually do this is because there's a risk to it, you know? Risk doesn't decrease as time goes on. Risk increases, right? And what I mean by that is...
But they don't see that.
No, they don't. But like, let's use an example, right? The most least risk period of your life would have been when you were younger.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But then at that specific time, for someone to want to leverage, purchase, start their own business or, purchase more investment properties and leverage against, take on more debt, they're going to say it feels like it's too much risk.
Yeah.
It's going to be even more risk when you get married. Yeah. And then it's going to be even more risk once you have a child, your second child.
Yes.
The risk is
even harder.
The risk is going to continue to increase, right? So you have more to quote unquote lose. Yeah. The best time to start is now, 100%, because the best time to have purchased property was 50 years ago. Yeah. I wasn't alive. So, I started a bit later, right? But the whole point of it is to understand the best time to purchase property isn't trying to time the market. The best time to purchase investment properties is when you are financially capable to do so. Yeah. And the sooner you get in, the better, because it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. Yeah?
That's correct. The old classic.
The old classic, man. Let's
It's true. It's a classic for a reason. So another scenario for people at home, if you have a property, is it better to sell that one property and utilize those funds to go buy two more or refinance that and, purchase any subsequent properties from that property?
Yeah. Great question. That's a good question, man. So that really, really honestly depends on the actual specific person and their risk appetite, right? But if we were to focus on wealth creation, you would be best off leveraging against it, so borrowing against the equity, and then using it to invest to multiply the amount of investment properties that you have, yeah? The truth is, property prices don't go down. They continuously move upwards. If you were to track back 50 years and you look at how the scale of the graph of however it goes, it will always go in a bit of a wave, right? But it will move in an upwards direction. So the truth is, the way I see it is, if you have one property and say it is paid off, right, you can sell it for sure. But you'll sell the property in a market on a high. And if you were to buy two, you'd also buy the two properties on a high, right? So why not, instead of selling on a high and buying on a high, you would just keep your asset that you have gained sufficient levels of capital growth through.
Yep.
Borrow against it, because when you borrow against it, you're not getting taxed when you sell it, right? Then you would utilize whatever equity you have, use non-personal entities, and purchase 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on how much that is, right?
Yep.
But let's just say, as an example, you have $1 million property. You can borrow against that at 80%. That 80% means that you can take out $800,000. And let's just say you only purchase, obviously utilize your services, and then they purchase, $500,000 properties, yeah? But they purchase multiple, right? Because 20% is $100,000 of a $500,000 purchase, plus costs and everything else. Let's say they use 150, yeah, each purchase. You can easily get 4, yeah? So why, instead of going from 1 to none to 2, why wouldn't you go from 1 to 1, 2, 3, 4, and then have 5? And then as time goes on, property values increase. The property that you kept originally has increased. The second one you purchase increase, third, fourth, fifth. That's how you compound.
Yes.
Right? So to answer that question, as long as it is responsible financially for you to do so, you would then take the equity out and then scale from there using a non-personal entity structure.
100%. So obviously not financial advice, but I totally agree. I think selling assets, I've been very guilty of being a smartass and absolutely timing each market beautifully. And I've done it multiple times where I time the market perfectly and I'll sell on the week and I'll get top dollar for that property. And you'll see that market drop off in a correction. after it's peaked, and I'll sell perfect, and I'll be 50K up, and it will drop within a couple of months. It's 50K down, and I've exited perfectly, right? What I've done is lost an asset over the course of time.
Yeah.
Whilst at the time thinking I'm incredibly smart because I've just peaked and sold the Sydney property or two or whatever at maximum that I could get, thinking I'm smart, and in the end, it goes on to go up again and again. So in the end, you lose. So everyone's circumstance is different, and their risk appetite and whatever. It's all different, and the end goals and plans are different. But I would not be looking to sell an asset. I'd be looking to keep every single asset I can, leveraging as much as possible and utilizing that to get into any subsequent assets. 100%. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Buy
and hold.
It continues to go up. Buy and hold.
Buy and hold. Buy, hold, scale.
Yeah. The only time I would look to exit a property is opportunity cost. So now I've got to exit. So I've got a portfolio, and I'm going to sell one property, and I've got to pay some capital gains. Once it's a realized gain, so it's sold, it's a realized gain, ATO comes for their clip. I only sell that property because that money can be utilized somewhere else.
Yeah.
For more of a profit than, or for a benefit or a more of a beneficial outcome than it is I'm taking those losses essentially.
Sure.
So the benefit of where that money is going far outweighs the loss that I'm incurring, paying money to the ATO.
Yeah. Look, definitely. Like I think every scenario has its own pros and cons, right? I think the main thing to understand is if you can't just borrow against it and then leverage the buy, then sell, right?
Yep.
It's very much dependent on the exact circumstance.
Keep your leverage, right? That's the whole point.
100%.
Keep your leverage.
Yeah, definitely.
100%.
Definitely.
Dan, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Property Banter by Pinnacle Buyers Agents. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us. If you like this, please, go ahead and like it again. Like, share, subscribe. This helps us. And of course, we appreciate doing this sort of content for you guys. And until next time, thank you for joining us.